Right. I've known Rita for 20 years, and I could take a picture of Rita 20 years ago and now, no different.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kira Hunting, and I am from the College of Communication and Information's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. We are so happy to have you here today and to have Ms. Virginia Moore here to come and speak with you. For today's introduction, we're going to have Stacy Fisher from the Kentucky School of the Deaf. I really want us to think about how this is part of education at all ages and stages of life, from early education to higher ed.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stacy Fisher, and I'm the 5th grade teacher at the Kentucky School for the Deaf. I am honored to be here introducing such a strong ally and advocate for the students that I serve. Virginia Moore grew up in a deaf family. She had 2 deaf parents and 2 deaf siblings. Her first language was American Sign Language. Most of us here grew up speaking and hearing our parents speak. We would mimic that with babbles and later words and sentences. For Virginia, she grew up watching and listening to her parents with her eyes. Her babbles most likely were hand movements, trying to mimic the hand shapes her family made, and then learning to sign words and sentences. Research shows that children coo and smile by 3 months of age. Children should babble by 6 months of age. Children should say simple words like mama and dad at 1 year old. These milestones can be achieved through a spoken language or through a signed language. The mode of that language is not the key. The access to the language is the key. That is one reason that the work that Miss Virginia Moore does is so important. Not only is she a nationally certified interpreter, she is also the executive director of the Kentucky Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. That means that she works, and I quote, to eliminate barriers and to meet the social, economic, educational, cultural, intellectual, and health and human service needs of deaf and hard of hearing Kentuckians. That last part is from the KCDHH mission statement. I did not come up with that on my own. She is also involved with the Deaf Festival Kentucky, a biennial event celebrating diversity, culture, art, language of deaf and hard of hearing people. She has also provided interpreting services for the USA Deaf Sports Federation, the US Deaf Olympic Committee, and the Kellogg Foundation. Virginia has a very important role to Kentuckians with hearing loss. The Kentucky Commission for Deaf and Hard of Hearing provides parents with deaf and hard of hearing children resources and options to assist in decision-making. They offer support for senior citizens in the community or in long-term care. The KCDHH works hard to provide support and services for all Kentuckians who have hearing loss in a variety of settings. There's a lot more I could say about Virginia Moore and the work she does, but I want to end with this. I asked a few deaf friends to tell me how Virginia Moore impacted them during this pandemic, and here are a few of their responses. I was aware of what was happening. I did not have to rely on the captions, which disappear so quickly. I could easily understand what the governor was saying, and that alone calmed my nerves. Another friend said, access. I had access to everything that was going on. Access to language and information is a beautiful thing. It is something we all deserve, a very basic human right. Virginia Moore understands this and does her part in providing that for people who are deaf and hard of hearing in Kentucky. It is an honor to introduce her as tonight's speaker. Please welcome Ms. Virginia Moore.
Wow. Thank you so much. I don't think I need to say anything else. That was great. But you know, we need to thank you and all the teachers here. That's who is helping our today's kids and helping move everything forward. Without the teachers, I don't know what we would do, especially during the pandemic. You all have had to think out of the box. So thank you so much for being here, to introducing me. I'm completely honored. So right now, you all are seeing, you want me over here? Okay, I'm sorry. I need to move. Okay, is this better? All right. So I'm a little short, so hopefully everybody can see me. All right. I appreciate everybody here in person and everybody out there virtually. I know out there virtually, this is a little different because you typically are seeing me sign and the governor speak. So you don't see me in this role very often, but I do have a voice, a big loud voice, and it talks a lot. So you'll have to, I'll have to apologize if I talk too much, but please feel free to ask your questions. If I don't answer them all today or can't get to all the questions, you'll have my contact information and send me a question because I want to be able to communicate with everyone who needs to understand how to provide services. What is, how do you get through all of this for deaf and hard of hearing individuals? So I'll be glad to do that. Let's talk a little bit about who I am. A lot of individuals want to know about Virginia more, and that shocks me to no end, because this is not common for an interpreter at all, or an executive director. But I am a daughter of 2 deaf parents. I'm the angel of 5 kids. I'm the baby, of course. My mother and father, my father worked in printing at Courier Journal. And at that time, a lot of deaf individuals worked in printing. That was a big, Courier Journal had a huge deaf community, whereas now you start finding them at Amazon, or there's so many jobs out there that are being accommodated for deaf and hard of hearing. They're spread out. They're working in computers, they're teachers. I was contacted by a nurse who's deaf, who's going to come to Kentucky, and they're looking for a job. They're veterinarians. They're in every occupation now. But my father was a printer, and my mother decided that 5 kids, she needed to stay home. But she did work. And where she worked at first was during World War II, when all the men were taken and the factories were left, and there wasn't enough individuals to work in the factories. There weren't enough individuals to work to try to get the men even signed up and registered to go to war. So my mother worked registering all the men who came in. They would give them their card, and she would put them in the little, she'd type them in the old fashioned typewriter, and she'd get them going, because there was a need for women and deaf individuals to work. At that time, they found that there were a lot of individuals that they needed. So deaf individuals were great workers, and there was no problem. When the war ended, of course, Rosie the Riveter and all the deaf individuals were sent home. And we know that's the history. But so my mother worked there. I have an older brother who is deaf. My oldest sister is hearing. So let me try to go through this real quick, just to give you an idea how this happens. It is genetic in my family. My oldest sister is hearing. She has 4 kids, 2 of which are deaf and 2 are not. The second is my brother. He has 5 children, 2 of which are deaf and 3 which are not. His oldest boy has 2 children, both are deaf. The third sibling is hearing, and she has 2 children, both are hearing. The fourth, the one closest to me, who is at the Kentucky School for the Deaf, she has 3, 1 of which is deaf. So, and then my niece, who had a son, her son is deaf. So it is genetic. We have a large deaf family. So sign language is very prevalent in our family. And it was my first language. As you all said, Mama, milk, daddy, I said, Mama, milk, daddy, milk. But kids will say, this is mama. But kids will, they'll say it like this, So you will find, when educating kids, actually, the statistics say that kids will learn sign language easier, gestures. You tell your child, even if they're hearing milk, they'll get that faster than saying milk. And communication happens faster. Communication happens faster visually for young children. And that's statistically proven. So a lot of parents will come to me, even with hearing children, and they'll say, I've taught my child how to say milk, mom, dad, dog. And I'll say, sure. And they'll tell me when they want their milk. And I'll say, yes, because they can. My niece is not even 2 years old yet. She has full signed sentences. And she communicates with me on FaceTime all the time. She tells me about the book her daddy read her last night. She tells me about the dog. She tells me about what she wants. I mean, she's brilliant. Of course, I think she's brilliant, but it's just because communication is happening. Communication is happening at that early age. So in my family, I learned how to, sign first. And everybody says to me, how did you learn how to speak? Well, I had older siblings, but my father would also, and there's an age gap between us. There were 3, and then there was my sister and I. So I was basically the only deaf child raised in the house because the other 3 were practically gone. Mom and dad just decided to have some more kids. So here we come along. So dad would turn on the TV. He'd have somebody come in and mark it on the TV with, at that time, they had liquid paper erase, and he would mark it and they said, that's not too loud and it's not too soft. Okay, that's right. All right. And then he would make sure that that TV was on for me to get input. And he would do the same thing with the radio, but he definitely wanted to make sure the radio was never too loud. So he always took it to that mark. And I would try to tell him, some stations still aren't loud enough. Some music is still not loud enough. It's got to go up higher, Dad. And he'd say, no, that's the mark. No, that's the mark. I could never convince him. Never. So that's pretty much who I am. Now, I'm also an executive director, and I've worked in different fields. I'm an interpreter, nationally certified interpreter. Did I think I wanted to become an interpreter or in this field when I first graduated from high school? No. Even though it was within my whole wheelhouse, it was just my life. You don't think you're going to be doing something that you really just do every day. So it was not a part of what I thought I was going to do. I went to Michigan State University because they had 100 and some odd careers, and you could make your own. So I thought I'd make my own. Of course, you know how we are. When we're young, we just have so many careers. But I wanted to go into criminology. And of course, all of CSI shows are copied and I watch them all, and I binge CSI because that's what I wanted to do. I came back from Michigan State because my father was in a car accident. So he passed and I wanted to be closer to home. So I finished out my degree with sociology and psychology. Looking for a job was not that easy, but somebody found out that I could sign. And signers, interpreters they're sparse. There's not enough. So he said, Virginia, you got to come over here and work with us. You got to come over here and work with us. So I started it, because I could, and I could get paid for something I knew how to do, right? And then I figured out communication through sign language is not that easy when you are an interpreter. Just because it's my first language doesn't mean I'm an interpreter. Doesn't mean that I can interpret well or understand what code of ethics were. So I got into a lot of problems because I thought communication was so easy. So I needed to get into some classes, read books, understand the code of ethics, understand what it meant to be the interpreter who is in the courtroom or at the doctor's appointment. When the doctor delivers that news, good or bad, do you stay in your role? How do you communicate it correctly? When they say take 3 pills a day with food, but you need to spread them out and make sure that they understand all that, because when they go home, they've got to get it right. And you're the one that passed that information on. It's stressful. We all know how communication is stressful. So this job can be very stressful because you've got to make sure that what you're doing is correct. Could you just imagine being in a courtroom And the judge sits there and the prosecutors are talking and they said, to the deaf individual, did you commit this crime? Did you climb that balcony? And this was one case that I did do. Did you climb all the balconies and did you just go into the homes and break in and steal everything? Well, the deaf person does, you know how when you're talking to someone who's hearing and they go, okay, I follow you. So there might be going, I got you. So they're following. So there's a lot of questions within questions, and the deaf person's going, okay, no. Well, it never got to that point where they said no, and I could say no because the prosecutor said, Your Honor, he's clearly nodding his head yes, and it's yes. Oh my gosh, talk about communication. I had to back up and go, no. That's not what they said. Hold on. He said no. Well, no, Your Honor. Now, who said no? You, the interpreter, or him? Then you get in a world of hurt trying to figure all this out. So as an interpreter, you've got to go in and communicate what your parameters are, what you're going to be doing, and how you can communicate between the two parties. So being an interpreter is a very stressful job sometimes. Sometimes it has its great rewards, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but it's stressful. I found it very interesting that the College of Communication and Information has asked me to come and speak because, oh my gosh, College of Communication. Communication is so important. I can't imagine being within this college to understand. You have what types of communication? Is anybody here still taking any of those classes? Maybe online? Can you tell me what? Okay, can you just tell me what are some of the careers people want when they come out of here?
Okay, so we've got practical papers, so we've got information technology that between technology and how people.
Okay.
So that is marketing, advertising, public relations. We've got journalism. People tend to know what journalism is. And then we've got media arts and studies, which is studying media, but also producing media and sound editing. And then final is our communication. So basically, in any job that you can imagine, there's somebody playing a communication.
Absolutely. It's weaved throughout one's life. It's weaved throughout one's career. It is one of the most important tools we have. We can have such a breakdown when communication breaks down. So it is so important. I think that everybody should learn a little bit about communication and understand who is your audience. How do you communicate? What do you need to communicate at any one time? And so that is something that as an interpreter or as the executive director for the deaf and hard of hearing, the Commission on the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, I'm constantly trying to look at the audience because the audience changes from the deaf individual to the hearing individual, to the parent, to the senior, to the nursing home, to the hospitals, to the attorneys, to the governor's office. So you have to understand who you're interpreting for, how you're doing it. So communication is insanely important. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of the statistical information and some of the information that I'm about to share now. So I'm going to be talking about some statistics and what I have all of these with me. Back there, when you leave, you can take a folder. All of these statistics are there. So please feel free to take that with you. So don't worry about having to remember all this. And if you are virtual, you can go on our kcdhh.org website, and you will also see the same information under statistics. Okay, media, PR, statistics, it's in the website. So first of all, the one thing that surprises a lot of individuals, there are 700,000 deaf and hard of hearing in the state of Kentucky. 700,000. Now, the majority of those are hard of hearing, not necessarily deaf. And you have to understand you have a percentage, 16% of the total population is what, and this is according to the 2010 census. So the census are getting ready to change. And we know that we're probably going to get a bump up because the population has changed. And hearing loss never goes away, never. In fact, it gets worse. Environmental, your job, what have you, it gets worse. So we'll have a higher population, but so it's approximately 16% of the population, but 700,000 deaf and hard of hearing. So could you imagine during this pandemic trying to explain to 700,000 deaf and hard of hearing individuals who's already nervous, even if they have just a mild hearing loss, trying to understand what's happening, and you're scared, you're nervous, and people have masks on? You're not getting that information. You're scared. You don't understand what's happening. So it's important that we know that we have that many individuals here in the state of Kentucky, and that we have to get the information out. Anything you all do, and in your college, and every occupation, you need to understand you have 700,000 deaf and hard of hearing. And all of those individuals deserve that communication. They deserve to understand what you're trying to share with them. Now, you have a group that primarily use sign language. And I'm going to say they're the easiest group. You may not think so at first. They're really the easiest group, because for the most part, if they're relying 100% on sign language, you bring in an interpreter and that group is covered. But when someone loses their hearing gradually, or all at once, or later in life, it is devastating. Because to try to understand you stop going to church because you can no longer hear, and if you're just sitting there, you stop getting together with your individuals out there, with your playing cards, because you keep saying, huh? And you don't want to do that anymore. You just get tired of doing that. You worry about going to the store. We had one lady that was just upset. She went into the store during the pandemic. She couldn't understand what she owed. And she asked the lady to take down her mask, and the woman got mad at her because she just needed to read her lips a minute or write it down. And so she just gave up. She said she's not going to the store during the pandemic. And she let me know that, because she said it was just too hard. And the fear factor. So we need to know that we have to communicate with those individuals. Hearing loss is the third largest national health issue. Third, behind heart and arthritis. Then it's hearing loss. Do you all hear about that as being a health issue? No, we do not hear about it. AARP doesn't even talk about it, and that's their group. We did a survey with nursing homes, all the nursing homes in Kentucky. Nobody ever does surveys. So we called them in person, and we talked to them, and we said, how many individuals do you have there that have a hearing loss? None. Really? How many individuals wear hearing aids? Oh, I think maybe one. Wow. We know that our hearing starts to get worse when you get older. You cannot walk into a nursing home and think that there is just one or no individuals there that have a hearing loss. And they are sitting there and they are labeled as violent, angry, because they just don't understand. Nobody is stopping to communicate with them. They're labeled. So they contact us and they say, I have somebody, and we go in, we say, you know what? She's not violent. She's not angry. She just can't hear you. She just doesn't understand. Slow down, take time. Let's figure out another way of communicating. And it's like, oh, well, she hears she talks just fine. So every person that has a hearing loss, they're not supposed to speak real well either. No, that's not true. We have two individuals in our office right now that speaks very well and can't hear a lick. Anita Dowd speaks very well, and she can hear very little, if nothing. So she speaks for herself, but she uses an interpreter. So she confuses you, but she has to have an interpreter. And so there's a continuum. And that continuum of hearing loss and being able to speak changes for any one person at any one time. I dare say that a person who can speak to you one-on-one just fine, even though they have a hearing loss, may have hearing aids, have no problem one-on-one. If they get pulled over by the police, they won't be able to hear a thing he says because fear takes over. And when fear takes over, your hearing goes down. That's just the way it is. You can't hear. Sometimes if you can't put your glasses on, you can't hear. You know how that is. We all talk about that phenomenon. Isn't that weird? You know, I don't hear well without my glasses. Also, more men have a hearing loss than women. Now, I don't always like to use that statistics because, you know, I'm sorry, we have a couple of men here, but sometimes we just say you hear when you want to hear. You know how it is. But basically, it's because of the field of work they've been in. Construction, loud work. They go out and mow grass. Do you know, if you look at a banana scale with hearing loss, mowing grass is very detrimental to the hearing loss. Can cause hearing loss because it's way up there on that decibel. They use what is that? Chainsaws. And they think, I'm just going to cut that down. It won't take me long. Oh no. And then afterwards, they wonder why their ears are ringing. So we have to be very protective of our hearing, and we're not. And hearing loss later in life leads to, unaddressed hearing loss can lead to early onset of dementia. And that's a statistic fact if it's unaddressed, because stimulation of the brain and what, you know, trying to be engaged all the time is not happening. So it can lead to early onset of dementia. So we have to start addressing hearing loss. We have to figure out how communication has to happen. That is imperative. 1 out of 5 teens will experience a hearing loss. 1 out of 5. That number always shocks me because those great earbuds, you know, they get right in that canal. They bring that music straight down in there, and all those little hair follicles that are just so sensitive starts to break down. And that's what carries your hearing. That's what carries the words. So they've got those things in there. I was on a plane, and I tell this story all the time because I was sitting not next to, but he was one over from me on a plane sitting there. And he was listening to his music through his ear pods. I could hear it just like I could sing the song with him. And I thought, wow. And I thought, do I say something to him? You know what they're going to do. So I just handed him a business card. And I said, call when you need it. And he sort of looked at me and I said, because you will. Because you will. Hearing loss is the first and second disability for all veterans coming back. For all veterans. And we are not addressing that enough for veterans. When we're in our careers or job or teaching or what have you, you've got to know if they were a veteran, because they're going to have either tinnitus, which is ringing in the ears, or they're going to have some severe to moderate hearing loss. And it's just the sheer work that they're in. And one of the number one things that the Veterans Hospital right now is starting to give out, are hearing aids. Hearing aids is in hearing aids. You know how much they are? It's not like a pair of glasses. You can't, you know, glasses and hearing aids, people try to make that correlation and you can't. Hearing aids are anywhere between $2,500 for one to anywhere upwards to $7,000 to $10,000. And you have the inside, you have the outside, you have programmable, you have Bluetooth, they have all kinds of things now. They're wonderful, but they're very expensive, very expensive. So does insurance pay for them? No, they don't. And we're trying to fight insurance for that. So we have to think. So those who need hearing aids aren't getting hearing aids. So we need to know how to communicate with these individuals. Over 33% of individuals over the age of 65, over 33% are going to have a hearing loss over the age of 65. I also, as a part of some of the information that I'm giving you, are the demographics for Kentucky. We have each county broken down, and you can look at your county. It's like if you're going to be working in a certain county or teaching in a certain county or serving or having class or whatever in a certain counties, you can see how many deaf and hard of hearing are in those counties, and you'll be surprised. So that's also in your folder. So I went to work for the Commission on the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and I've been there now about 27 years. I started out as an interpreter for the executive director at that time, Dr. Bobby Scoggins. Fabulous, wonderful person, hard worker, worked me to death. That was one of the hardest jobs I've ever had, and she worked me to death because I ran with her everywhere. I went to legislation, we passed bills, we were walking and communicating. And as you know, legislators don't want to give you a minute. And if they do give you a minute, you better say what you want to say, and you better say it fast, and you better be accurate. Sometimes you're walking down the hall. I can't tell you the number of times that I am walking and trying to figure out and you know, trying to make sure you don't fall over something. And I'm communicating and signing and going back and forth, and they're walking, they're talking, and you've got to get that information out there. So she really sort of introduced me to some of the hardships of trying to work for state government. I then went on to run a program and then eventually became the executive director. Now, that position, now I'm a child of deaf adults, so I know about deafness. But if somebody asked me, Virginia, should you be in that position? My answer to you is going to be no. Because of communication and the perception of communication. I will tell you, I'm straight up excellent. I'm good at my job. And I know that. So I'm not trying to say I shouldn't be there because of me. No. It's the perception. Do you know when you go to a legislator and you try to communicate something, and I communicate it just by talking, they don't get it. When you have a deaf person signing to them and they've got to be faced for the first time with that communication barrier or having to go through an interpreter, they stop, they pause, they think, and they go, okay. So it does, it really makes your cause important. So to represent the group, I'm constantly putting a deaf person in front of me to help. I'm constantly bringing up the leadership of the deaf community and the hard of hearing community. So there's great organizations here. There's Hearing Loss Association for the Deaf here in Kentucky. You have the Kentucky Association for the Deaf, and there's Alexander Graham Bell. So we are one of a few state agencies, I think only one of two, if I'm not mistaken, that is governed by a board. I have a board that works with me, actually, that quote unquote, I will say hire and fires me. Of course, you know, I still work for the governor, so I walk that fine line. You know, of course, he can hire and fire me too, but I have a board who mandates a lot of things, and they're made up of the community. So we have to work hand in hand with that community to understand what their needs are. So I will challenge each of you in your profession, in your job as a teacher, teaching or going out there and working, creating anything. Don't create something without including the individuals that you might need to be working with, especially deaf and hard of hearing. Vocational rehabilitation asked Dr. Bobby Scoggins when I was an interpreter for her. We are so excited. We developed a one-stop shop. Now this has been about, oh, I guess 20 years ago now. Good gosh. Anyway, we developed a one-stop shop. We're so excited. Now they never asked her anything about how should the one-stop shop be accessible to deaf and hard of hearing, nothing. They just said, come and be a part of this and tell us what you think. It's all done. She walks up to the door and guess what? You got to push a button and communicate with somebody to get into that particular one-stop shop. She was stopped at the door and communication was not going to happen. And they were all standing there behind her, and I was sitting there interpreting, and Bobby said, guess we need to go home. She turned around and went home. And everybody just stood there stunned because they didn't take time to figure out who their audience was. Who are they communicating with? Who's going to have to access their services? They didn't take time. So the commission has 5 mandates. And one of the mandates is to advise the governor and the General Assembly. And I'll get back to that because I've been doing a lot of that. The other is to work with public and private agencies, advising them on how to have better access to their programming, how to provide services, to understand their population. Oversee interpreting services. We provide interpreters to all state government. We coordinate those interpreters to all of state government, but we also try to work with all the interpreters in the state of Kentucky to make sure that they are qualified. We were one of the first 5 or so in the United States that required licensure. Now, licensure is required. You cannot work as an interpreter without a license, which means in order to get a license, you have to be nationally certified. And that means at that time, there were 2 national tests. And you can take one or the other. Then you pay your fee and you prove that you are nationally certified. That allowed us to keep situations like when the school system needed an interpreter for a young man, and they knew that this young man rode the bus, and the bus driver would say, "Hi, how are you?" And the kid would smile and laugh and say, "Fine." And that was considered communication. So they took her off the bus, put her in the classroom, and made her an interpreter. And that's all she could do. And that was happening to our young kids. That was how communication was happening. So we made sure that that was not going to happen again. And we passed licensure law. Boy, there has been some really growing pains with that. There's not enough licensed interpreters. At that time, there was not enough at all. And here you had some legislators in the education department saying, well, what are these kids going to do in school? We have to get a licensed interpreter. Something's better than nothing. Isn't that right? How many times have you been faced in your lifetime with something's better than nothing? That's not always true. Do you know how damaging that can be in some situations? If I was not the interpreter in that courtroom and I talked to you all about that young man who was doing this, he would have been guilty and in jail. He was guilty, but he would have been guilty and in jail. The law did work it out, and he had his due process. So if not, he wouldn't. They would have and then that poor child that wants to understand what's going on, they're getting whatever. You ever be on a cell phone call, and you go through where you get a word and you're trying to fit it in? What? How? Or you've seen those commercials where, and I love those commercials, where the sister's seeing the baby for the first time and she's smiling, but she's freezing up. So she's got this ugly look on her face, and the other sister's saying, well, you never have been satisfied with anything I did. Well, that's communication, and it's wrong, and it's not happening. So those kind of things. So just to have somebody, it's not always the best. We always have to think about that. Providing services subpar. If you're going to do something, make sure you're going to do it and do it right. And ask how to find out how to do it right. We also oversee the telecommunication access program. Just for your information, our agency, and you're going to have these slicks inside now this is the slick about the agency. This is the statistical information. You'll see it talks about children. It talks about seniors. It talks about the veterans. So this has all the statistical information. And this is the equipment distribution program. every state, the telecommunications law was passed, and every state is required to have a relay service now. If you look at your phone bill, you pay 3 cents here in the state of Kentucky. 2 cents of that comes to me. 1 cent of that goes to the relay service. And what I do with that 1 cent is I purchase equipment, telecommunication equipment for the deaf and hard of hearing, which was particularly important during this pandemic because individuals didn't have access to the internet or online services. People were using their smartphones, their iPads, they're trying to make phone calls and they couldn't make phone calls. So you have a CapTel CapTel is a great device for hard of hearing. It spells out everything the hearing person is saying. And if you can speak well, you talk for yourself and you read what they're saying. And it's wonderful. It's communication happening. There's amplified phones so that people were shut-ins. We've all been shut in. This is the first in-person presentation I've given, I think, in a very long time. Yeah, I was so excited to come out and see you guys. Look, I can see all around you. This is fantastic instead of that flat virtually. I appreciate you guys too. Thanks for tuning in, but you know, and we have to because the pandemic really requires it. It demands it. So because of that, we were able to provide equipment, and the equipment went to individuals in nursing homes that could not hear or talk to their daughter at home. Could you imagine the nursing homes being shut down and they could not call their daughter because they couldn't hear on the phone? So we made sure that they had the appropriate equipment. That is what this is about. Now, I have jabbered on, and I need to get to what I did with the governor. Working with the governor during COVID, one of the most challenging, rewarding, frustrating, aggravating times of my life. When this hit, March 3rd, or it's March 6th, the governor went on and he did a press conference. Everybody came running up to my office. Governor's doing a press conference. COVID is here. It has hit Kentucky. We've had our first case. And I just panicked because I'd been following it. And I thought, we've got to get this information out, and it's got to go out correctly. You know, this can be, you know, and information is already so, how people communicating this is insane on some aspects. You know, Facebook, what have you. So I called the governor's office up and I said, I'm Virginia Moore, I'm the executive director. You have 700,000 deaf and hard of hearing. They need this information. We have called the governor's office before and asked to be able to provide interpreters during their press conference, and no go. We have asked emergency management, can we provide interpreting services when you have tornado warnings or when the tornado is hit or when we have flooding? And the answer has been, the room's too small. The room is too small to provide that communication. We have asked if we can do this because it's so important to get that information out. And we have asked television and news, when you go live, please caption. Oh, it's very expensive. We can't afford it. That information is so important. You know, you can get grants to pay for that. You know, Channel 41 has had Baptist East or one of the hospitals have sponsored the captioning for several years now. You can always get somebody to do that. So we were trying to push all of these issues. When I called that first day, the governor said, yes, get her down here. We're doing another one at 4 o'clock. And I'm going, okay, who's going to be the interpreter? Because I'm the executive director of the commission, so I don't consider myself an interpreter really. So I'm looking for where the Rita Zernhelds are, where all the other interpreters are. You know, I'm thinking, okay, I got to get somebody in there. And they said, you need to come now. And then I thought, I work for the governor. And I know I've been safe because I know I haven't been out of town on vacation or anything. And it was not too far from spring break and everybody was going. So I made sure I got there. And the very first press conference happened. And I was standing right next to him. So was Dr. Stack and everybody else. And it was so funny because we were all right up there huddled and I was, interpreting and we were in this information and he didn't blink an eye. It was happening and people were getting the information. We had to tell television though, please move me. Please put me in the, everybody was there. All the cameras were there and they kept saying, can you move over? Can you move over? Can you move over? Okay. So now, because we need a shot of the governor. Well, no, I can't. And the governor says, come back over here. I said, yes. I said, you frame us. And that's how you have to do it. They forget that. Frame the interpreter in there. So it was a process to start out with, but it was 2 times a day, every day. And I was there and I couldn't believe the access we were having. And people were calling in and saying, oh my gosh, Virginia, I'm getting the information. I don't have to go to my neighbors. But it's scary. I need to know what to do. What can we do? So, we're giving the information every day. So the positive results were everybody was getting it. And of course, as an interpreter, I had to pull other people in. So there's 3 certified interpreters in my office. We all work for the governor. So I say, okay, the 3 of us, we had to stay safe. We had to make sure that what we did would not compromise. We're in the room with the governor, Dr. Stack, and we're giving people sign names. Dr. Stack's name is this. Why? Because he wore bow ties a lot. So and a deaf person said, oh, that man, is he the Dr. Stack with the bow tie? And I said, okay, that's his sign name, Dr. Stack. So we're all in there. So we had to be careful. So that was looming on our, on our back, our thinking is how do we be careful? And then the mask started. It was very important to start wearing masks. So we needed to wear masks. And of course, as an interpreter, communication happens where? All over. My face, my eyebrows. My eyebrows go up, that might be a question. If I'm confused or frustrated, I'm doing this. I'm doing all kinds of things because I've got to get the message across. His tone is the tone I've got to get across. So communication is happening all over. You can't wear a mask. Cannot wear a mask. So one evening, the governor said, do you believe it? They had a coronavirus party. Bunch of kids got together and had a coronavirus party. Do you believe it? So my sign was, okay, so you see this, right? I'm going, do you believe it? John Oliver calls me 2 weeks later. John Oliver he's on HBO or something like that. I think it's HBO, and he does the political sitcom type things. He says, we would like to use that snippet where you sign, do you believe they're doing the coronavirus party? And I went, how's that going to be communicated across everybody else? What was that? My facial expression was the tone. And, I was thinking, I said, I'll get back to you. So I asked the governor's people, and they said, well, Virginia, is it you they're using? I said, yes. That's fine. I said, okay. Well, John Oliver said, and he captioned, do you see what this lady's doing as an interpreter? Do you believe they had a coronavirus party? He said, look at her. You know what she's really saying? What the F? And I'm sitting there watching it that night. And I went, the governor did not say that word. It was interpreted that way to everybody else. Okay. Well, I thought, oh no. I go in and I'm interpreting the next day, nothing. Next day, nothing. Next day, nothing. 5th or 6th day I go in. We're getting ready to talk about a video shoot, and the governor walks out. Everybody walks out, and the governor's standing there next to me, and he goes, so what the F, huh? And I went, he said, that's okay, Virginia. And that's what it was. I said, okay. So it was interesting how they could take that communication, but communication happens. And you guys need to know this. One of the giveaways you're going to take, you're going to think, what? It's a little mirror, compact mirror. You need to know how you're communicating. Your facial expression, if you're working with deaf or hard of hearing, they read you like a book. Your facial expression says so much. You need to know that your body language is important. It's important to everybody, but to the deaf and hard of hearing, believe me, they're watching because they can't necessarily hear the tone. The tone is coming across on your face, your body language. So if you don't mean it, if you don't mean to look mad or upset or angry, and some people can have this, yeah, everything's just great, I'm happy. And you don't, and you hear it and you think, okay, well, okay. But a deaf person is never going to hear that, okay, it was okay. No, you're going to be mad. My mother was in the hospital. I left to go feed the dogs and come back. When I came back, she was sleeping on her side with the note that she had scribbled out. And she'd put this note on her side. Now, Mom was also losing her sight. So this note was, big, and I knew it was painstaking for her to do it. And it said, I'm sorry if I upset you. I picked it up and I said, Mom, what is this note about? And she said, oh, I must have upset the nurse because she came in and wanted to draw, the other nurse wanted to draw blood. And I said, I just had blood drawn. And she did. I stayed until her blood was drawn and then I left. So she was trying to tell him, I've already had blood drawn. And she got so upset with me. She said she just got so upset and I felt bad because I didn't mean to upset her. I said, really? I said, okay. I walked out to the nurse. Nurse said, I wasn't upset. I said, well, yes, you were. You were frustrated. You're tired. You're in a hurry. You're trying to get it to everybody. I understand that. My mother understands that. But when you're there at the moment, how are you communicating? What's your facial expression? What's your body language? That's communication. You've got to know what you're doing because she took it so different. And she was just like, and she walked in and she apologized to Mom. Mom said, no, you don't need to apologize, but I just wanted to make sure that we were communicating. Yeah. And I thought, oh my gosh. Little things like that happen. Little things like that happen. There were challenges when I interpreted, of course. When the governor goes through all those counties, sometimes you'll see me do this because I'm just trying to hold that up. And yes, we spell every letter. Breathitt, Floyd, Henry, Jackson, we spell every one. I wish I could go as fast as he did. See what Rita will do. I mean, it's crazy. And we do. And you know that not everybody can read that fast, but you do the best you can. And I think, well, nobody's ever reading it all. The governor's office got a complaint because one of the other interpreters wasn't spelling Murfreesboro right. And I thought, they saw that? Oh my gosh. Well, I said something to the governor once. I said, can you slow down? I'm about to lose a fingernail. And he just said, oh, I never thought of it. Sure. He's like an airplane. And then he's off again because there's so much to say in that short amount of time. And that, of course, that's one of the challenges, but it's nothing that we couldn't handle. The personal challenges as an interpreter, communicating the names of those who passed, communicating the ages of individuals who have passed, seeing the flags that he posted, the number of people who have died. You take a deep breath and you do it and you try to just say, I'm communicating this, but one of those loved ones are looking at you on TV or they're watching, and one of those names or one of those counties that you're talking about, one of those ages belongs to somebody who's grieving. It's painful. It's painful to communicate that. That's one of the biggest challenges, to watch what this pandemic did and how the governor got us through it. I've had people, deaf individuals from all over the United States say that they tuned in to the Facebook posting of just watch the governor and the interpreter because they got better access and information because of this governor and the fact that he put communication out there and an interpreter. From Florida to Texas to California, everywhere. A lot of people were watching Kentucky because of how he handled it. And the fact that he had an interpreter. In fact, there were t-shirts made. Kentucky's Virginia, you know, or Annie Brashear's this. And there were t-shirts and people were doing all kinds of things. So the celebrity status was shocking. I didn't know what to think about it. It was because of something so bad that was happening. People were getting together. Everybody was tuning in at a certain time. And you knew what everybody was doing is they were listening to him or they were watching me and they were getting it. And that was sort of a good thing. And so as much as I don't understand it, I appreciate people just wanting to do something so nice. You know, going into Kroger's grocery store, tired, you know, walking around and you hear somebody from a distance scream, "Hey, Virginia," and you look up and you're wanting, you know, you think it's gonna be a friend or somebody you're supposed to know. And how, you know, how you're sitting and going, "Ooh, I don't remember their name," and all that. And you say, "Oh, hey, how are you?" Just because, you know, that's what we do. I don't know these people. And they were saying hi. And I was just saying hi. It was amazing how much people appreciated what was being communicated and how it was being communicated. It was insane. And then I had to communicate a very personal situation. Is that when I had the uterine cancer? When it came across so fast and it was a hard stop for me. And everybody wanted to know where I was. So do I communicate that? Very, very personal. No. I cried for 3 days, not because I had uterine cancer, because everybody wanted to know where I was and I needed to say something. The governor's office said no, and Governor Brashear himself called me with his wife. The very next day he found out and said, "You take care of you, you don't have to do anything." But the calls were coming into my office. The calls were coming in. Where is she? Does she have COVID? Does she have COVID? So I had to put it out there. And the way I tried to put it out there is a public announcement. We have to take care of ourselves. Women have to stop. Men have to stop. This pandemic is horrible, but you can't sit prisoner in your own home when you have other issues going on. You've got to go to the doctor. You've got to go to the hospital and you've got to get yourself taken care of. Then I could handle it. The outpouring from Kentuckians were unreal. If I had an opportunity, and I'm glad this is virtual, I want to thank each and every person for your prayers, your prayer blankets, your cards. I have bags of cards. It was unreal how people just wanted to reach out and say, they told me their story. They shared how it happened to them. They told me things that I need to think about afterwards that my doctor didn't tell me. And then they just said, "We're thinking of you." And little kids wrote me notes. It was wonderful. You know, there's a lot of good in this world. You open the door to communication and access, and a lot of that good happens. A lot of that good happens. And we need to remember that when we're trying to communicate. I think I need to stop about right here. We do have other things that we do, and Deaf Festival is one of them. Please go to our website. We have a great festival. It's going to be in Danville, September 22, and please try to go. We flipped the world upside down on you. We have deaf and hard of hearing performers from all over. We provide you an interpreter, and you get to find out what it's like to use an interpreter and see the sea of hands and the communication happening. So please come, but I need to stop. I have gone way over my time, so I apologize. What kind of questions do you all have? Sure.
Given your experience and your time with the governor and the pandemic, what kind of platform does that give you, Virginia, to work on things like FEMA and the emergency access system and all that? I mean, does that give you a broader door to go through and maybe work on services for deaf, hard of hearing there?
You are so correct. Thank you for bringing that up. If anything good could come out of this coronavirus situation, and that is the doors came open. That is FEMA and I have wonderful relationship. That is emergency management is going to always have an interpreter. That is the hospitals are trying to figure out how to make sure that communication is happening. That is the school systems are trying to figure out when they had to go Zoom to make sure that interpreter was there too. It is amazing the phone calls and the times and the doors that are happening. The 25 years of hitting my head against a brick wall and just making a dent and getting through happened so fast this year. It really did. Now, what we can't do is forget. We can't forget. Once the door is open, people tend to just, okay, it's all over. We're going back to normal. We don't ever need to go back. I don't even know what normal is. Does anybody really know what normal is? Normal is what today is. And tomorrow is going to be a different normal. But we need to make sure our normal includes everything. So yes, the door is flung wide open and our office is busy. And I appreciate trying to educate, teach, and make sure that we have access for everyone. Thank you for that question. Yes, online.
Yep, we have a question from the chat.
Okay.
So this is from our chat. What are some practical things that hearing people can do to be good communicators when interacting with deaf and hard of hearing people? Attention to body language is one. What are some more? And that's from one of our faculty members, Erica Engstrom.
Okay. Yes, that's a good question. You know, the one thing that when we're growing up in a hearing family, you know, your parents stop, don't point. How many times did you all remember they said, don't point, don't look, don't make that face, don't, you're stand still. Point, gesture, don't stand still, communicate, do your best. You've got an iPhone, you've got email, you do, and then use Dragon Speaks. You know, my nephew at the age of 5 said, I want to go over to Starbucks and get something, and he's deaf. He's also a little person. He's a deaf and a little person. He didn't even, at that time, I don't even think he was 2'5", 2 feet by 5. I mean, he's little guy. He walks up to that counter, they don't see him. I said, here, I'll go with you and interpret. He said, I don't need you. I said, oh, really? Okay. He walks over there, types out what he wants, pushes for Siri. At that time, it was Dragon Speaks. Now it's like Siri, pushes the button, holds it up over the counter, and it says what he wanted. He wanted hot chocolate. I know he wants hot chocolate, and he wanted a large venti or whatever it is. And I'm watching, and they're looking over, and they see this little fella down there. He's smiling up. And then he comes back down. They said, okay. And he looks and that's how he communicated. Don't be afraid to try anything and everything. My father used to write on his dirty car window to the mechanics. And then, you know, when it was that next morning, when it was, you know, when the fog rolled in, you could see what he was saying. I was like, oh, really? Anything and everything. Do not limit yourself. Try it all. Any other questions?
So as executive director, you are, you serve deaf and hard of hearing. And I think we in larger society would lump everybody into one big group. And this is a community that I learned from our people in the Disability Resource Center that even people who are have a similar level of hearing loss. Their needs are different. And there's often differences of opinions on how to serve the deaf and hard of hearing community. What are some of the things that I like this communicating for all Kentuckians. How do you balance those different opinions and different needs in what is not a monolithic community, but sometimes it all gets lumped together?
No kidding, no kidding. And I would be remorse if I did not. I always say deaf and hard of hearing, but it's also speech impaired and deaf blind. Okay, we also serve deaf blind and speech impaired because it's a continuum of communication needs. And so you can have somebody, and you have to understand, you can have somebody has a severe visual impairment and a slight hearing impairment, or it can be either or. So the continuum of needs in the individual. So to understand and what we can do, again, I'm sorry, I got myself all confused on that.
Just basically, how do you serve?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, yes. Trying to serve all those individuals.
Yeah.
You can't. Okay, that's the first thing you have to say. I can't serve them all. I can, because there's no one size fits all. You want to so badly get a one size fits all, and it's really not going to happen because they're all on that continuum. You have to figure out who the individual is. You have to know your audience. You have to know what their needs are, and then you have to do your best to tailor it. So you have interpreters that can sign American Sign Language or English, okay? And some individuals are more English and some are more ASL. What does an interpreter do when you have a mixed audience? They try to go PSE, which is sort of in between, and do the best, and they'll move their mouth more if they need to. So it is a challenge, but there are so many different variances, and you have to know, and we try to provide information in different formats, different ways. And when we communicate with teachers or try to, what do you do when you have students in different modes of communication? You do your best, and you know that everybody's on a continuum of needs, always on a continuum of needs. We had two parents come into our office, and one had a son at age 7 and one had a son that was age 9. They were both labeled as autistic. They were not autistic, they were only deaf. Because if you do not communicate, if you don't figure out a way to find what continuum they're on and how they need to have their communication, they mimic autistic behaviors because nobody's communicated with them. They can isolate themselves, talk to themselves, do things, and it's very similar. So it's very sad if you don't try to look at the individual and try to definitely look at the hearing loss. And we're working with First Steps to try to make sure kids are identified early, and there's so many things, and I could go on and on and on, but more questions? Yes, ma'am. I am so sorry I talked too long and didn't leave enough time for questions.
Oh, you're fine. Get out the room.
Hi, I wanted to piggyback on what the previous question. I am a professor of history here at the University of Kentucky, but also in relation to this topic, my mother is the hearing child of 2 deaf parents. She wrote a book about it called On the Beat of Truth. And Maxine Childress Brown is her name.
Yes.
And she makes a claim, not a claim, but what she says is that Black deaf culture is wholly different.
Yes, it is.
And the sign language is wholly different
Yes, it is.
from white deaf culture. And so my question to you is, when you are interpreting for Governor Beshear, did you find that you had to adapt your interpretations for different audiences of color? I don't know if this is being recorded, you could shout out to my mom, Maxine Childress Brown. She would love that.
Absolutely. Maxine Childress Brown, you're wonderful.
She's gonna love that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let me say this. It is very hard to try to interpret when you do something like the governor's press conference for all modality needs. So you pick one and you sort of take that path. But you are absolutely correct that deaf Black have their own vernacular. They have their own slang. They have their own type of, some signs and words in different cultures. Absolutely. So when you ask a deaf person who's happens to be Black, or a Black person who happens to be deaf, what's first? They each will tell you something different. They each will tell you something different. But it is so important that we know there is an organization, the Deaf Black Organization, for deaf and hard of hearing, because you have to know that they have a whole different culture. A lot of people think sign language is universal. It is not. There's different, you have different dialects and different slangs from California to Kentucky to Texas to Northerner and South, but you also have it within the cultures themselves. So absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up, because that's so important. We're dealing with that now. We had to deal with that during the Breonna Taylor and Floyd. We were trying to provide interpreting access for a group of deaf Black, and it's not easy because there's not enough interpreters, especially interpreters of color. And we're trying to foster that. But trying to provide the information in different ways was also a challenge, because there was a time also that what we did do is I would sign for the governor, then I would run out of the room and I would sit down and I would do another version in more of an English ASL. And that would be, and I would tape it, and they would take that, because then I would just sort of give a synopsis of what happened. And I would do that in English ASL, and he would caption that right away. My tech person would caption that right away. He's wonderful. And then we took that and we flipped it in black and white for the deaf blind. Then we took that and we had a certified deaf, we had a deaf interpreter. She's not certified yet. She's working on it. A deaf person who's also an interpreter, and she interpreted the governor, and that was posted. And all that happened before 12 o'clock at night. So it all could be done by the next morning. And that happened for approximately 6 or 7 months. So there's a lot to it. Oh, thank you for bringing that up. And yes, whoa.
So we have another question from the chat. In such a remote and technological world, we have a new opportunity to bring in people who utilize technology in a way that allows them to communicate in ways that they couldn't in decades past. Do you have any advice on how we recruit talent within these groups?
To recruit talent within these groups.
Yeah, this is not my question, it's a question from the chat. So if the chat friend is still
But
here,
let me try to,
a little more would help.
and I'm not quite sure exactly what she means about recruiting talent, but I will talk about technology and the deaf and hard of hearing. So that is a double-edged sword. Real quick, the hospitals are now wanting to use remote interpreting. So you have an iPad, people, they'll bring you an iPad or a computer, and that's remote interpreting. If you're having a child, you do not want to have to look at an iPad to try to figure out what the doctor is saying. That's ridiculous. If you're going to have a CAT scan or an MRI, how are you being communicated to? That's ridiculous. So technology, people don't think about that. They immediately want to do that. So we've had to fight that battle quite a bit. Technology is not always good for every situation. And remote interpreting is not always good. And some of the remote interpreters are coming in from California. They don't understand some of us here in Kentucky. So, it's crazy. We have to use local interpreters. And for the most part, you cannot replace a live interpreter. Technology cannot replace the live interpreter. I will say that. In some situations, absolutely, maybe, but you have to be very careful. Any other questions? I'm here to answer or talk to you personally if you would wish. Please take some of the information. I've got hand sanitizers for you. Everybody be safe, get your hand sanitizer. Pick up your mirror, know how you communicate, look at yourself, know how you project it, because that's very important. And thank you for this opportunity. And I will always take this opportunity to thank our current administration on how they opened the doors. Governor Andy Beshear was wonderful. He opened the doors. He allowed 700,000 deaf and hard of hearing to understand access. He worked with the media department to make sure that they captioned it on their television end. And they moved my little box around so that they didn't put a banner across my face. So thank you all very much.